Hello again. Difficult day today because it's the fourth anniversary of daughters being taken, as I alluded to in the previous video. I actually concluded the previous video in a bit of a slightly anxious and hastily fashion. The reason for that was I had some unexpected knocks on the door, and you can imagine after the police state terror that I suffered. The hands of Adam Lloyd, 1812 of Northumbria Police, still hasn't returned devices, some of which he's well aware of, are not owned, have never been used for any purpose than photography and other things. Had nothing to do with this situation. He's well aware of that. He knows that it's imposing huge anxiety and psychological abuse. But there you are. As I also explained, his case has badly unraveled because he started talking about a YouTube video and spray painting a car. The YouTube video that he referred to didn't name Rachel Hudson. They actually questioned me on this. They were foolish enough to question me on this in the recorded interview. It alludes to a judge being on notice. Yes, indeed, that's her. For reasons of what we believe is gross corruption and racism, which I stand by, and we'll go through those in these videos in greater detail. I hope that these videos will stimulate the need for reform, help my own daughter, who's suffered enormous psychological abuse and had her heritage destroyed, and also help other parents who might be going through a similar sort of tyranny. So let's hope we can achieve those things. Returning to the points that I made yesterday, essentially you had a situation where the children were placed in the head of pastoral care in the school, and she was aware of some extremely serious issues we had with the quality of pastoral care at the school, and was extremely hostile when they were raised. The school were because they were trying to show that they'd recovered from probably one of the worst bullying cases in their modern history, where a boy had to suffer horrendous abuse on their watch. So we immediately said this is a very, very dangerous conflict of interest, and indeed it was. And they were in her care for around just over 2 weeks, and we weren't allowed to see them during that time. Polish was banned, so immediately the Polish language was banned from them being taken. Full knowledge of their heritage. This is also significant because when I became litigant in person, and I'll explain why I chose to do that later on, they I noticed that there wasn't a parental assessment of this pastoral lead in the bundle. So my solicitor hadn't gone down that route, and I'll explain why some of this happens. And Paul Mahan, who is a very, very important document because it shows the due diligence, whether they consider conflicts of interest and things like that, wasn't in the bundle for people to see. And you could see what they were trying to do. And I raised it, and Paul Mahan knew he'd breached his professional code of conduct at Side Tyneside by not putting this in the bundle. Again, apologised. It's a bit like what you see with Labour now, that this culture of deceit and manipulation where things are drawn to their attention. Jonathan Reynolds, you remember him, Rachel Reeves, embellishing things, misleading people on things, and then they say, "Oh, sorry, it was an oversight." So exactly the same as that. But Rachel Hudson, who was the presiding judge when I'd moved to. She wasn't at the start. The first hearing, which I'll come to, was someone else, but she was aware of all these things before. It didn't uh, in any way criticise or warn Mahan about this issues with holding things back from the bundles. And I also explained in previous videos how we weren't able to see very crucial evidence of what we saw. Now we can see now is enormous psychological abuse that they've placed on my younger daughter to try to. So right at the end that she suddenly changed her mind and wanted to stay where she is. So that's why that's significant. It's also significant because, as I said, I'd had these issues with the deputy head as well with this absurd situation. A girl, an arm in a sling. It's imperative that that wasn't knocked. Was asked to perform drama in stockings on a shiny wooden floor, polished wooden floor. And I said to him, look, explain the risk reward to that, knowing what you knew, that if she fell over, what this could mean. So this is why these CPOMs are incredibly important. Because you are in a situation where a school can backdate and grossly misrepresent encounters when you believe they've acted short of what is expected of them. And he did that. He tried to then say, well, I was aggressive and this, that, and the other, and they're thinking of calling for assistance and so on. Like that. It was nothing like that. And I'll tell you why, because they tried to use this in the hearing. I'll tell you why it's an issue. He went away and said, okay, I'll conduct an investigation, da, 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 da. And on 2 occasions, he asked me to come into the school to discuss it. And I explained to him I was very busy at the time. I said, I'm grateful you're looking into this, but is it something we can do via email or telephone? Because it's quite difficult to come. So you've got to ask the question why someone would do that and simultaneously say. So what it was, it's a common thing now that when you find instances of deceit, corruption and things like that, wrongdoing, and you put it to someone, the defense is you're aggressive or you're an ist or something like that. And you've seen even with Rachel Reeves when you, even the supporters can't say that she looks like somebody who's competent in her role in the way all what's happened during the short period of time when she's been chancellor. Even she has to retort back to say it's because I'm a woman, and it's a similar mentality. Whereas in reality, my time in finance, I've come across plenty of bright women. There's no an issue with women being bright and able to do it, perform the chancellor's job. And as we've seen, there have been many men who have performed poorly as well. It's not that, but you can see the mentality. So moving on and how these things work. So if you imagine your children are taken, you're in, and quite late on this case on a Thursday, you're in a state of hyper depression, anxiety, and so on and so forth. So you have to ring around for some assistance because you've got no time. They've got the march on you. They've taken your children. They're getting to work immediately. So you ring around. My wife found some representation, which turned out to be extremely poor, and I did. And I ended up with someone, a chap called Derek Park, who was horrendous, and he and handed over the case to Kate Westgarth, who was also horrendous, performing nothing other than secretarial jobs, really. So you get them, and then the next thing you know, next issue you face is this police order, which they effectively detained us, prevented us from collecting our younger daughter illegally. When we arrived at the school, for some hours we were legally entitled to pick up our younger daughter. And they engineered this situation between Kim Simpson and the head of pastoral care, ironically, at the school. That's why this conflict of interest is extremely important. We were told, leave it to the final hearing, leave it to the final hearing. That is a big con, and I'll come back to that. So this, so then this police order expires. So then you get a call from them saying, we want to come, we've got a section 20, because the first social worker, their jobs are divided. So effectively, the first social worker is to get them to the position of an interim care order. to get that first care order. That's her job. So it doesn't matter what they do, just get us there. So the first, you get something from her saying we're going to come round and we've got something for you to sign. And in the meantime, I spoke to Park and said, really, when this police order expires, aren't we entitled to then go and collect our younger daughter from this head of pastoral care in peaceful terms? To say, look, we're legally entitled to take her back. And he said, well, no, that'll look really, really bad. This will look really bad. You've got to cooperate. This is the other con. You've got to cooperate. You've got to cooperate. This is the con, because they keep saying cooperate, do everything they want in the final hearing. It's a con. It's a big, 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 big con. Be very, very, very aware of that. So Park effectively said, you've got to do this. So I said, I haven't got a choice. He said, yes, you've got a choice, Gary. You've got a choice. But you haven't, because he's saying if you don't do it, they will go through court and get something and then use it against you. So then we met at a property that we owned at the time. It was Laura Skelton and a colleague, and they turn up, and they're quite aggressive. They put this again. My wife, Polish national, can understand English, of course, but the more complex angles to it, the legal phrases and things like that, she did struggle with, and indeed it's even a challenge for some English people, British-born people. And they're aggressively saying, you have to sign this. You have to sign this because it'll look bad if you don't. You'll have to sign this because we'll go to court and we'll show that you haven't cooperated. So they're all of a sudden blackmailing you, straight away blackmailing, because we're saying, well, actually, we're not sure about this. And they'll say, we'll go away, get a court in, and we'll use it against you. We are against you. So they'll say, and actually they used some absurd, a colleague used an absurd phrase and said, because we are against you, we give you legal aid. That's nonsense. For a start, you've got to say, why are you against somebody when you haven't even started an investigation? The reason being, as I'll show in further, I've covered in other videos and I'll expand on this, is it's a reverse engineered conclusion. They know from the very outset, because it's a key part of their funding model, and there's huge demand from private equity, what they want to do. It's very, very clear. I could hear the language. I could unpack the narrative of what they were doing. This was never going to be a fair process, and it never is in situations like this. So essentially, I wish we hadn't succumbed, but we were bullied effectively in a position of duress to sign the Section 20, and then that gets them to the first hearing, essentially, where they can apply for an interim care order, where any judge is going to wave that through, no matter what you put and say, raise these things. And even your solicitor said, the threshold's so low, they'll get it, and they do. They generally, the local authority gets its own way. The family courts know the funding model, this evil, corrupt business model, and they're aware of it. And your judges, in essence, are the gatekeepers to that model. They're signing it off. Hence the aggression I've received, the police state terror at the behest of Rachel Hudson. So you sign it, and I think the next thing, his younger daughter, was due to attend a Christmas service this was one of the saddest things of our life, a Christmas service in the locality of the school. It was in a church. Wife went to that, and she showed me some videos and pictures of it, and it was incredibly heartbreaking in terms of the trauma we've been through. And she was, in essence, manhandled by representatives of the school in terms of where she was able to sit and so on and so forth. And there's one picture image where she shows me where the daughter's walking past out the church, and you could tell she'd been terrorized into not even looking at her mother, and you could see she was holding her head up desperately to try to be brave, and she was incredibly brave. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen, and I'm deeply, deeply traumatized by what my wife and daughter had to go through on that occasion. Bearing in mind, nothing whatsoever been proven, and all the history I've taken through. Um, this being banned from Polish language was raised immediately with the useless, because Park passed it over to Westcott. She was appallingly bad. I was writing the statements. She was offering no insight whatsoever. I said, look, we've got issues here where there was an illegal act from the start, and Polish, they're banned from talking Polish. These are extremely serious issues. Never raised. Oh no, 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 no. Leave it to the final hearing. But why can you leave it to the final hearing 6 months or so down the line, where they've got time to put your child under immense stress and psychological abuse? It's a massive con. Cooperate, and wait for the magic final hearing. They want the final hearing at the end because it's the big payday, a bit like on the Welltech situation. Everybody wants that big trial payday. Whereas it's very, very obvious that things could be resolved much, much earlier than that. But there's money at stake, and as this process develops, um, you end up with more and more people coming into the situation. It proliferates like a virus, more and more coming in, and they're all drawing down from the third estate, the taxpayer in essence, and something that possibly could be resolved by people talking and doing it in a construct positive way and saying, how can we resolve this? It's never a resolve, it's immediately adversarial, massively adversarial. Everybody's against you, nobody's for you. Even the independents I'll come to are not independent. Um, so this takes us up to the initial, the first hearing, and how this works is quite disgusting trade. You have your solicitors, and then in terms of barristers, they just pick people who are looking to fill a job. Just they just say, oh, can you do this for us? Attend this for us? Can you do this for us? Oh, you can stick this in your diary and earn some money. It is like that. It really, really, really is like that, because they come in, they've got scant knowledge of the case. You don't even really get a chance to talk to them. You get a chance to have a couple of minutes conversation before the hearing. They don't really know the children. They don't know their names. Already at this point, social services have been referring to a younger daughter by an initial of her first name. Complete dehumanized commodification of a human being. Um, and know, solicitors giving gigs to their mates. The barristers don't care. The solicitors don't care because if you win the case, lose the case, they'll get the legal aid. It doesn't really matter. They're never going to go full throttle against a local authority because they work for firms that also do business for the local authorities, and it's immensely, immensely corrupt. It's one of the most nauseous things I've ever seen. So then you lead up to this first hearing, and you've got two poorly informed barristers operating for us. Of course, the local authority have got theirs. Even given the head start they got, their barrister was appalling. It wasn't the one who saw it through at the end. She was appalling, but it didn't really matter because. Sorry, I'm just looking around. So I was looking for something in particular because I've got quite a powerful quote for you. It didn't really matter because the only thing I would say about the judge who inevitably signed off this interim care order, which rolls it into the case, effectively, the full case, he did make some observations about heritage. Nothing substantial. He just acknowledged it and said that recommended that we would see her daughter 3 times a week, in essence, which the local authority completely ignored for some weeks. And he recommended, with some intelligence, that these be on locations because he knew that we were people that like to go out and explore, locations and so on and so forth, and it would be better for everybody. And Local authority completely ignored that, and this was raised to Rachel Hudson, and when she took on, and she didn't hold the local authority really to account for anything, other than she got a bit impatient about the lack of evidence. I'll also come to that. And she so gets signed off. So this was kind of like sometime in mid-December, I think it was, and then we got this first visit to see our daughter. So by which time, not get a chance to talk to her. First time I got to see her was in just before Christmas. So 3 weeks out of our care, in which time she'd passed to a foster care at that time, where she remains. And we we were made to sign this dreadful document that you cannot speak Polish. My wife couldn't speak Polish, couldn't greet her daughter in Polish, couldn't say Happy Christmas in Polish. So 3 weeks in care without that. Why would you do that? Why would a civilized country, knowing full well how much we valued her heritage, how much she enjoyed it herself prior to being taken, why would you do that? No provision at all. I can tell you, in that meeting, you could see the psychological abuse had started. She started, younger daughter, repeating older daughter's allegations. No, you're not allowed to talk about the case, and that, in some reasons you can understand why, because it's difficult for Kafka. But she was regurgitating these mendacious allegations from older daughter. We subsequently, pretty much unravelled them. You can see they were putting into her mind that somehow we were a risk. Somehow they were trying to build, a terror mentality in their mind that their parents were at risk right away. So that's why they needed those 3 weeks. They wanted to do that. And also with this oppressive, you can't speak Polish, which to me was a crime against humanity, for 3 weeks. And bear in mind, the meeting was in their location, filthy contact centre, managed by an awful lady called the Poppyfield Centre. And they couldn't put up an interpreter, so her mother could talk Polish. Bearing in mind, she hadn't had Polish for three weeks. Started up repeating allegations that had been made. And subsequently, when the case went on, we started to see some of the CPOMs and some of the notes. They were starting to terrorize the children by saying that we were planning to abduct them from school, to build this psychological terror inside them. This is a system of immense evil. It really, really is. And this is why, along with what I've done to expose deficiencies in the financial services sector, in terms of how the FCA, because of this conflict of interest, prioritise their own reputation over the welfare of victims, and how all this does lead into the system, in the commodification as well of vulnerable people into the hands of private equity, and how that relates to the financial system, and the gross abuses of Judge Rachel Hudson. Judges are not deities, they're not gods. They must be subject to proper accountability. They cannot accept falsified evidence, unsigned statements, and so on, and then just want to shut it down and then engage in police state terror when it's exposed. Judges are not deities. I genuinely believe this is a wicked, evil system that has to be looked at very, very closely and reconfigured, starting at the premise that your first option should always be to repair families, not to tear them up and monetize the breakup of families. There are certain instances where that's not possible. I do understand that, but that's not what we're seeing. So bear with me. I should have prepared better, actually. I'm going to revert to Kafka. There's a quote here from America, some of you may know. And it refers to Joseph K. when he's subject to a persecution. Whilst working at a hotel, he's essentially fitted up for a theft. He'd perhaps been slack in certain areas, but he wasn't bad. I'll read the quote to you, and I can't think of anything really that sums this up better than this quote: the process to facilitate this evil trade. It's impossible to defend oneself where there is no goodwill, and there is no goodwill. Nobody wants to understand your side. Nobody wants to reason. Cole told himself, and he made no further answers to the head waiter. Deeply as that seemed to afflict Therese, he knew that all he could say would appear quite different to the others, and that whether a good or bad construction was to be put on his actions depended alone on the spirit in which he was judged. That is why I think Kafka in many ways was a complete genius. He saw a lot of this terror coming. You can look at his stories and say they're a little bit strange, but if you look at observations in novels like The Castle, the America, and The Trial, they were chilling but incredibly accurate. That's it for now. I'll be back soon. Take care.